The long and maddening season had finally come to an end. The war was over. Yet, for countless people, the war had not truly ended. Major Edward Nolan's unit, reduced to only a handful of survivors, received orders over the radio to return. Nolan was a seasoned officer. He kept his column alert and warned his men that it was entirely possible many enemy soldiers had never received word of the ceasefire. Anything could still happen. They were to move with caution. And it did happen. While passing through the mountainous region of eastern Burma, 6 Japanese bombers appeared overhead. They unleashed such a devastating bombardment that the entire convoy was obliterated. Vehicles were torn apart, the ground erupted in flames, and men vanished in fire and smoke. No one ever understood how Major Nolan survived. When he regained consciousness, he found himself pinned beneath an overturned truck. The vehicle's weight pressed against his back, but the chassis had shielded his spine, sparing his life. Pain coursed through his body, yet none of his injuries were immediately fatal. He crawled out from beneath the wreckage and examined himself. Bruised, bleeding, shaken but alive. All around him lay total destruction. Not a single comrade had survived. Jeeps had burned down to blackened frames, and the charred remains of men were scattered in fragments across the ground. The air was heavy, suffocating, thick with death. Nolan took in the horrific scene and released a long, weary breath. In the past few years, what had he seen besides scenes like this? He felt no shock anymore, not even grief for his fallen men. His problem was simpler and far more terrifying. He was alone, completely alone. This place was not safe. Death could strike again at any moment. He wanted to live, yet had no idea where to go. In every direction stretched barren plains, broken only by scattered clusters of trees. The men who knew the routes through this region were all dead. He inspected each destroyed vehicle. Only one truck, the one that had fallen over him, was partially intact, but it was impossible for him to right it alone. He searched the area, gathering whatever might help him survive the journey ahead: food, water, light weapons that could be used if needed. With these supplies, he set off on foot. There were no roads, no maps, no clear destination. He walked toward an unknown fate. By day, the vast plains appeared merely empty. By night, the same clusters of trees transformed into terrifying shapes. Every rustle made him feel as though enemy soldiers might emerge at any moment. Nolan knew the Japanese well, their brutality, their fearlessness, their willingness to die rather than retreat. The Allied command had underestimated them. Nolan believed that without the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Japanese war machine might never have been stopped. Those memories followed him as he walked. Occasionally military aircraft passed overhead. Whose they were, where they were headed, he could not tell. His journey became nothing more than aimless movement toward an unnamed destination. His physical strength gradually faded, but more crushing than hunger or exhaustion was the weight of isolation. If only there were 2 men instead of 1. By what he estimated to be the 4th day, the nights had grown oppressively hot. Trees appeared more frequently now, offering brief moments of rest. Nolan sat with his back against a tree trunk when he heard a sound. He froze instantly. It could be the sound of death. He held his breath and listened with every ounce of focus. His combat-honed instincts snapped awake. Within moments, he knew someone was there no more than 10 or 15 yards away. 1 person or more. His pistol was in his hand, finger resting on the trigger. Any lingering fatigue vanished. Only the soldier remained. When there was no immediate movement, Nolan decided to act. He checked his flashlight, kept his pistol ready, and moved forward on his knees and elbows. In the direction of the sound stood a small cluster of trees. From between them, a human foot protruded into view. Someone was lying there. He resisted the urge to switch on the light. The man could be armed. Nolan needed the advantage. Convinced the stranger was alone, He slipped the flashlight back into his pocket, adjusted his grip on the pistol, and crept forward like a cat. Reaching the cluster of trees, he suddenly bent down, seized the foot with all his strength, and yanked it hard. A piercing scream shattered the night. Gunshots erupted, but the bullets flew past Nolan. He leapt backward, raised his pistol, aimed at the shadowed figure, and shouted, "Drop the weapon. One more shot and I'll blow your head apart." There was silence. Then, after a moment, a voice called out, "Are you alive?" "Yes," Nolan replied. "Who are you?" "I'm Major Daniel Mercer, Company 83, Mission Burma." Nolan lowered his gun. "I'm sorry," he said. "You understand why?" The man tried to rise but collapsed. "My legs," he said weakly. "They're shattered. I can't stand. Please help me." Compassion stirred in Nolan's heart. More than that, this man was one of his own. He lifted him gently and propped him against a tree, then examined the wounds. The bones in Mercer's lower legs had been pulverized by bullets. In the beam of the flashlight, Nolan saw a handsome young officer with a powerful build. Despite his condition, there was an unsettling calm on his face. His eyes carried a quiet, unwavering resolve. "I don't have bandages," Nolan said softly. "Thank you anyway," Mercer replied. They shared what food and water Nolan had. Nolan told him the war was over. When he mentioned Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Mercer fell silent. His expression gave nothing away. They spoke for hours. Mercer was brave, too brave. Life still resonated in his voice, despite the agony. "You should rest," Nolan finally said. Mercer smiled faintly. "Major, I may sound foolish, but I believe I'll survive. I know I'll go home." "That's not foolish," Nolan said. "That's courage." Yet deep inside, Nolan knew the truth. Nolan did not voice his doubts. He knew Mercer's injuries were catastrophic. Survival would demand amputations if survival was even possible. But he refused to crush the young man's resolve. He stayed awake beside him through the night, his mind wrestling with a thought he dared not speak. Military doctrine was brutal in such situations. Mercy killings were sometimes considered an act of compassion. A few bullets could end unbearable suffering. Yet, Nolan could not bring himself to do it. At dawn, Mercer was smiling again. Seeing that calm expression, Nolan felt ashamed of the thoughts he had entertained. How could he even have considered such a thing? They began traveling together. Nolan carried Mercer on his shoulders. Progress was painfully slow, but Nolan felt a strange peace. For the first time in days, his journey had meaning. The days passed. On the third morning, Mercer said the pain had eased. He asked Nolan to help him stand, suggesting they fashion crude crutches from tree branches. Nolan refused. He had seen the wounds too clearly. Fate would decide, he said, and until then, he would carry him. That night, beneath the moonlit sky, they spoke of home. Nolan talked about his wife and his 2 children, a son and a daughter. Mercer listened quietly, as though absorbing every word. Then Mercer began to speak of himself. There was a woman, a promise made long ago, a love that had endured years of separation. Their engagement had been shattered by conflict between their families, a bitter dispute over property that turned relatives into enemies. On the day of her wedding, forced upon her against her will, she had refused to give her consent. She would not stain her conscience by accepting a life she did not choose. "I'll go back," Mercer said softly. "I'll find her. This belief is what keeps me alive." Nolan encouraged him, though doubt gnawed at his heart. That night, Mercer revealed something else. From a concealed leather pouch sewn into his clothing, he poured several stones into his palm. Even in the dim light, they gleamed unmistakably, diamonds, rare and flawless. "They were given to me by an old man in Burma," Mercer said. "He was dying," he said. They had been in his family for generations, but he could no longer protect them. "I helped him in his final hours. This was his gift. The diamonds." glittered like frozen fire. I'll sell them, Mercer continued. I'll build a future for her. I want to give her a life so bright that every hardship fades away. Nolan stared at the stones. Something inside him fractured. He congratulated Mercer, forced a smile, spoke words of encouragement, but inwardly, a storm had begun to rise. Those diamonds. That night, while Mercer slept, Nolan made his decision. He crept closer, his movements slow and deliberate. He reached into Mercer's clothing and pulled out the pouch. Mercer woke instantly. "No, Major, please," he whispered. Then something impossible happened. Mercer stood. On shattered legs, trembling yet upright, he stood before Nolan and seized him with surprising strength. "This isn't you," Mercer pleaded. "You are not this man." But Nolan was stronger. Rage and greed had stripped him of mercy. He grabbed Mercer by the throat, forced him down, and drew the knife he had kept hidden. Again and again, he plunged it into Mercer's back. With each blow, Mercer cried out, "No, Major, this isn't you," until the voice fell silent. Nolan released the lifeless body. The pouch of diamonds was in his possession. He walked away alone. Days later, he encountered an Allied unit and was taken to safety. He returned home as a decorated officer. Wealth followed land, status, comfort. The diamonds were sold discreetly, and fortune poured into his life. Yet, peace never came. A voice followed him. Years passed, but the whispers did not fade. They grew stronger in silence, sharper in solitude. When his daughter later discovered the hidden diary, the truth emerged at last. He was not haunted by a man. He was haunted by his own conscience. And conscience never stops hunting. The diary revealed everything. In his own hand, Nolan had written of the crime he could never confess aloud. He had called himself a criminal of conscience, one for whom no court on earth could offer absolution. He wrote that the glitter of the diamonds had blinded him, shattered his humanity, and awakened a savagery he had never believed possible within himself. He admitted that he had murdered a man who trusted him completely, a man who had seen him as a savior. He wrote that he had gained wealth, land, respect, yet lost every treasure that gave life meaning. Sleep had abandoned him, solitude had become unbearable. Everywhere he went, he felt watched. In the rustling of leaves, in the whisper of wind through trees, he heard Mercer's voice, repeating the same words over and over. "This isn't you." Nolan confessed that the fear consuming him was not of revenge, nor of the dead returning to claim him. It was the terror of knowing that the true enemy was within, that the murderer was not the war, not circumstance, not fate, but himself. He wrote that his conscience had become his jailer, his executioner, and his judge. He ended the diary with a final plea. If these pages were ever found, he asked the reader to pray for him, not because he deserved forgiveness, but because he no longer had the strength to ask for it himself. He wrote that a man who betrays trust destroys more than a life. He annihilates his own soul. The last line was written in a trembling hand. "I am guilty, and guilt is a punishment that never ends." When Nolan's daughter finished reading, her hands were shaking. The truth was undeniable now. Her father had been both a hero and a murderer. The fear that had haunted him all these years had not been madness, it had been justice, slowly and relentlessly closing in. Outside, the evening wind stirred the trees. For a moment, she thought she heard footsteps on the path beyond the garden. She looked up, but there was no one there, only shadows stretching long across the grass. Nolan was gone, but his conscience remained. The house was silent after that. The funeral passed in a blur of faces, murmured condolences, and lowered eyes. People spoke of Nolan as a brave officer, a disciplined man, a survivor of war. No one spoke of fear. No one spoke of the nights he spent pacing, the sudden starts, the way his hands trembled whenever a name brushed too close to memory. His wife moved through the rituals like someone walking underwater. His son stood stiff, jaw clenched, answering questions with nods and brief words. His daughter said nothing at all. She carried the diary inside her bag, its weight heavier than a stone. Days passed, then weeks. Life returned to its ordinary shape, but something essential had been broken. Conversations ended too quickly. Laughter felt misplaced. Every quiet moment carried the echo of a truth that could not be spoken without tearing everything apart. One evening, unable to bear it any longer, she sat alone and opened the diary again. She read every page from beginning to end. The war, the march through ruined terrain, the wounded man who had trusted Nolan completely, the diamonds, the decision, the knife, the moment when mercy vanished and something irreversible took its place. This time, she did not stop at the confession. She read the margins, the half lines, the places where the pen had pressed so hard it tore the paper. She saw not triumph, but collapse. Not greed alone, but a weakness that had grown quietly, fed by exhaustion, fear, and opportunity. Her father had not been chased by a ghost. He had been pursued by himself. That night, she placed the diary back beneath the bed, exactly where she had found it. Some truths were not meant to be carried forward. They were meant to end where they began. Outside, the wind moved through the trees again. This time, there were no whispers. Years went by. Time did what it always does. It softened the edges without erasing the shape. The house changed hands. The garden grew wild, then was trimmed back again by strangers who never knew what had happened beneath those trees. Nolan's name faded into a line in old service records, a photograph in a drawer, a memory that surfaced only on anniversaries. His children moved on with their lives. The son carried discipline forward, choosing order and structure, determined never to allow weakness to govern his decisions. The daughter carried silence. She married, moved far from the place where everything had ended, and built a life that looked whole from the outside. She never spoke of the diary. She never spoke of the man her father had killed. Some nights, she dreamed of footsteps behind her, but when she woke, the room was always empty. The diary remained where it was. No one else ever found it. And perhaps that was justice of another kind, not exposure, not punishment by law, but containment. A crime sealed within the mind that committed it, then buried with that mind when it finally collapsed under its own weight. War had taken many lives. Greed had taken one more, but conscience had taken the last. There were no ghosts left to wander the garden, no voices in the trees, no shadows waiting in doorways, only the quiet certainty that some sins do not return to claim revenge. They simply stay, and they wait until the person who committed them is gone. If this story stayed with you longer than expected, like, share, and subscribe for more stories that refuse to fade.